The pendulum clock in the vast entrance hall of the old family estate struck 5 in the afternoon with a solemn echo, marking the transition from daylight to the shadows that were already lurking in the corners. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of aged wood, centuries of dust, and a persistent dampness rising from the depths. 9-year-old Lucas, a boy with eyes that seemed to capture more than the ordinary, stood there, his small, fragile body almost lost in the grandeur of the place. He clutched a galactic night action figure to his chest, his lips murmuring low, repetitive phrases in an attempt to organize the sensory chaos that invaded him. The mysterious creaking of the floorboards, the constant dripping of a forgotten gutter outside, the ghostly whistling of the wind through the cracks in the tall windows. His aunt, Isadora, a woman of forced elegance and impatient gaze, dragged him by the hand with a force that bothered him, while she spoke in a low voice to the estate's housekeeper, Mrs. Alara, an imposing figure with a tight bun and a stern face. Isadora's tone, a mixture of relief and dismissal, was cutting. "Here he is, Alara, Lucas. His sister's situation has changed, and he's special. You understand? He lives in his own world, doesn't talk much. I thought he'd be a perfect helper in the service areas. He won't get in anyone's way upstairs, and frankly, he won't even be noticed." Mrs. Alara, with a suspicious look and a discreet grimace at the boy, nodded slowly, picking up a dirty denim apron and throwing it to Lucas with a gesture of palpable contempt. "Come on, boy. Stop swaying. Work is waiting." Lucas felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. The darkness of the basement, which he could already glimpse through the half-open door, seemed to swallow him. But the pain of his aunt's words and the housekeeper's contempt hurt him deeper, a direct blow to his soul. Basement helper. He would be unnoticed, discarded. How could this be? He had been handed over, abandoned like an object to live in darkness and be forgotten without a voice, without a purpose other than invisibility. In the damp, labyrinthine basement of the old estate, which was now his new home and silent prison, Lucas huddled in a dark corner, among dusty boxes and cobwebs that looked like veils of oblivion. The galactic rider action figure, his only loyal companion, was clutched tightly against his chest, absorbing his silent tears. He felt the cold stone against his back, the penetrating dampness that chilled him to the bone, and the deep, crushing loneliness that surrounded him, weighing heavily on his small soul. Although he did not speak or communicate in a way that others could understand, his mind was an uncontrollable whirlwind of thoughts, emotions, and overwhelming anguish that found no escape or relief. She said I was special, that I lived in my own world, as if that were a defect, an irreparable flaw in my being, and that I would never be noticed, as if my existence were a nuisance to be erased, a presence to be ignored. My own aunt, the one who was supposed to protect me, the one who was supposed to love me, handed me over to strangers, discarded me here. My parents, they're gone. They left for a place far away and silent, and I was left alone, completely alone in a world that doesn't want me, that doesn't understand me, that rejects me. I don't understand why they don't want me. I don't understand the deafening noise of people, the lights that blind me, the touch that scares and hurts me. My rocking, my repeated phrases about the galactic night and the constellations. It's my way of calming down, of not exploding in the midst of the chaos that surrounds me, of finding a little peace and order in my overstimulated mind. But for them, for the world up there, it was weird, a problem, shameful, something to be hidden, locked down here, away from sight. I feel like I'm a burden, a weight to everyone, a nuisance that needed to be kept in the basement, away from sight, away from conversations, away from life. I see them up there, on the property, through the cracks in the floor, with their loud laughter and their noisy lives, full of parties and guests. And here I am, in the dark, with the rats and the never-ending dust. Mrs. Alara, she's strict. She gives me chores, points her finger at what I have to do, but she never looks me in the eye. No one really sees me. No one hears me. No one tries to enter my world. I just wanted to be loved for who I am, in my essence, with all my peculiarities, without having to be normal, without having to change who I am, without having to pretend to be what I'm not, without having to be forgotten and ignored. The silence in the basement was the only witness to Lucas's deep pain and desperate longing for acceptance, for a love he had never known. After the tragic and sudden loss of his parents in an unexpected accident, Lucas was left in the care of his aunt Isadora, a woman who lived for her social image and prestige in high society. His aunt's life, already filled with social engagements and a relentless pursuit of advancement and recognition, became a search for solutions to the problem that Lucas's autism represented for her reputation. The first light came with the recommendation of a renowned therapist, Dr. Walter, who promised to discipline autistic children with a rigorous method of negative reinforcement and behavioral conditioning. He needs to learn who's boss, Mrs. Isadora. Obedience is the key to progress in cases like his. You have to be firm, show authority, said Dr. Walter, with an imposing voice and a cold, unempathetic gaze, as if he saw Lucas as nothing more than an experiment to be controlled. Isadora, desperate to get rid of the burden that Lucas represented and the social pressures, readily agreed. Lucas was subjected to a regime of punishment for his stims and his resistance to socialization, which left him terrified and in constant panic. The result? More panic for Lucas, who withdrew even further, becoming a shadow of his former self, losing his vitality and joy. Dr. Walter, seeing Lucas's lack of progress and uncooperativeness, claimed that he was a hopeless case and coldly dismissed him. The second salvation came with the promise of an institution that offered specialized care and controlled environments for children with autism, away from prying eyes. The director, Donna Sofia, with a welcoming smile and a facade of professionalism that barely concealed her coldness, assured Isadora that Lucas would have the perfect environment to develop and become functional for society. Isadora, seduced by the idea that Lucas would be well cared for away from her sight and her worries, enrolled him, paying a fortune that drained her finances, but which she considered an investment in her own peace of mind. However, the institution was a front for even more cruel and inhumane isolation. Lucas was constantly reprimanded for his movements and sounds, for not following strict rules, and was isolated in a cold room for hours without adequate stimulation, just so he wouldn't disrupt the smooth running of the place and the other normal inmates. The promise of development turned into solitary confinement, where Lucas regressed every day, losing his essence and vitality, wasting away. The greatest disappointment, however, came from Isadora's own family, who pressured her incessantly to get rid of Lucas. Lucas's grandfather, Mr. Arthur, an influential businessman of few affectionate words, suggested that Lucas be sent to work as a helper on the family's old property, a little visited place with the promise that he would be useful, and most importantly, would not be noticed, remaining invisible to society. Isadora, tired of the burden and seeking a solution that would free her from all the social pressures and judgments, accepted the proposal with almost palpable relief. The handing over of Lucas as a basement helper, presented as an honorable solution and a favor to Isadora, was in fact an act of abandonment and discarding, pushing Lucas into darkness and loneliness, where his life seemed doomed to oblivion and total invisibility. The old property, with its dark corridors and the lingering smell of mold and neglect, was a stage for silent, daily conflict for Lucas. Isadora, his aunt who had discarded him, rarely visited him, only to make sure he was not causing any trouble, and to keep up appearances in front of the family. The housekeeper, Mrs. Alara, with her rigid posture, impeccable uniform, and impersonal gaze, represented the coldness and institutional indifference of the place. She gave Lucas the most repetitive and isolated tasks in the basement, such as organizing boxes into endless piles, cleaning cobwebs from the darkest corners, and polishing forgotten objects, reinforcing the idea that he was just an invisible helper, a piece of furniture without life or voice. Lucas's main source of distress, besides loneliness and abandonment, was the constant noise of the old property itself, its creaking floors, the wind whistling through the broken windows, the distant clinking of cutlery during dinners upstairs, and occasionally, the loud and disorderly noise of the parties that Isadora's family held in the upper halls. These sounds amplified in his mind, creating unbearable sensory chaos that pushed him to the brink of panic and disorganization. No one seemed to understand his stims, his repetitive and incessant movements, which were his desperate way of calming himself and self-regulating in the midst of that hostile and threatening environment. The conflict came to a head during one of the rare visits of Mr. Arthur, his grandfather, a cold, calculating businessman concerned only with profit, who had come to inspect the property for a possible multi-million-dollar sale. He was talking animatedly with Mrs. Ilara in the basement, where Lucas was working. Mr. Arthur, in a tone of voice that brooked no argument, said to the housekeeper, "Take this opportunity to get rid of the boy, Ilara. He's a nuisance. We can't have any problems or oddities when showing the property to important buyers. He's just a basement helper, right? No one needs to know he's here." Mrs. Ilara's laughter, softer but equally cruel and complicit, was a direct blow to Lucas's heart, striking him in his dignity. The words of his grandfather, whom he rarely saw but who carried the weight of authority and family contempt, hit him hard. He was a problem. He would be discarded again, thrown into an even darker, colder place. At that moment, amid the darkness and humiliation of the basement, Lucas felt the ground shake, not just metaphorically from his pain, but literally, with a subtle tremor coming from the foundations of the old property. A sharp, prolonged creak came from the depths, a sound that to his autistic mind was not just the old building. It was a pattern of anomaly, a harbinger of imminent and catastrophic danger. A new and terrible truth, invisible to others, was beginning to reveal itself, and only Lucas, in his strangeness and his unique mind, would be able to perceive it, and with that, perhaps save everyone, even those who despised him. Mr. Arthur's words, "We can't have problems when it's time to show the property. He's just a basement helper, right?" echoed in the depths of the basement, hitting Lucas with the force of a hurricane, tearing his soul to pieces. The cruelty of being discarded again, coupled with the icy indifference of the housekeeper, Mrs. Ilara, caused a searing pain and silent rage to pierce his small body. But at that very moment, the sharp creaking of the property's foundations, which he had noticed for weeks, became more intense, a vibrating sound that, to his autistic mind, was not just noise but the language of danger, revealing a pattern of catastrophic and imminent anomaly. Lucas didn't speak. His hands, which had been clenching the galactic night, were now static, his fingers tense. His eyes, which rarely made contact and seemed lost in the void, fixed with frightening intensity on the growing crack in one of the stone walls of the basement, an open wound in the structure of the mansion. He didn't just see a crack in the rock. He saw the compression of the internal structures, the relentless instability of the ground beneath the mansion, the imminence of total and inevitable collapse. His mind, which processed information in a non-linear way and was hyper-focused on minute details, had diagnosed what 3 generations of the family and countless engineers had ignored over the years. The mansion was sinking. Slowly but surely, it was giving way under the weight of its own history and a hidden, deep structural flaw, a terminal illness that no one had detected, a tragedy waiting to happen. Amelia, the mansion's cook, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, who always treated Lucas with quiet kindness, offering him a piece of cake when she saw him in the basement, noticed the boy's fixed, desperate gaze. She was used to Lucas's strange but fascinating attention to detail. He looked at her with an urgency and terror she had never seen before. Amelia, with her keen intuition and kind heart, followed Lucas's gaze to the crack. She couldn't see what he saw, the structural complexity, but she felt the subtle tremor beneath her feet and the vibration in the air, a chill. Suddenly, there was a crash from above, the sound of wood tearing, plaster falling. A support pillar in the mansion's main hall, which welcomed the family's most important guests and where million-dollar deals were closed, creaked and cracked loudly, collapsing in part. The voices of Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Ilara, upstairs, rose in panic, followed by the screams of guests. A larger collapse was imminent, uncontrollable. Amelia, frightened, grabbed Lucas by the arm, ready to flee. "Lucas, what was that? Let's go. We have to get out of here. It's dangerous." But Lucas didn't move. He pulled Amelia's hand away forcefully and pointed frantically at the crack in the wall, then at the main power panel in the corner of the basement. and emitted a series of high-pitched, rapid sounds, an alarm unintelligible to most, but which Amelia felt was a crucial and urgent warning. His mind had calculated that the imminent collapse would affect the mansion's old electrical system, causing a widespread short circuit and, inevitably, a devastating fire that would consume everything, lives and property alike. Lucas's revenge would not be with words, but with a desperate action, an act of pure and unconditional heroism to save the mansion that ignored him and the lives that despised him, proving that true intelligence does not need to be verbalized to be the most powerful and essential. The crash from upstairs was followed by widespread panic, screams, the sound of breaking objects, chaos reigning in the luxurious halls of the old property. In the basement, Amelia, the cook, felt the tremor that Lucas had sensed so early. She saw the terror but also the conviction in the boy's eyes. He dragged her with surprising strength toward the main electrical panel. "Lucas, what are you doing? It's very dangerous," she asked, her voice trembling with fear and surprise. Lucas didn't answer. He frantically pointed to the exposed electrical wires, which glowed dangerously with sparks in the partial darkness, to the cracks deepening in the concrete, and, with an urgency that Amelia understood through maternal intuition, to the main power lever. Lucas's mind, processing information at breakneck speed, had predicted the impending disaster. The collapse of the pillar would cut the wires, causing an uncontrollable fire in seconds, consuming the entire mansion and its stories. With her body trembling but driven by conviction and the desperation in Lucas's eyes, Amelia pulled the main lever with all her strength. A loud, sharp click echoed through the basement. The lights in the mansion flickered violently and went out completely, plunging the building into sudden and frightening darkness. Panic increased upstairs, but the risk of fire was miraculously averted. Seconds later, there was a final, deafening crash that shook the ground. The pillar in the main hall collapsed completely, bringing down part of the ceiling and wall and throwing debris everywhere. Dust and debris scattered, but without the fire that could have been devastating. The first victory was the relative silence that followed the collapse, a silence of survival. Mr. Arthur, the grandfather, and Mrs. Alara, the housekeeper, ran down the stairs, their faces pale and covered with dust and sweat, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. They saw Amelia and Lucas. In the basement, unharmed, Mr. Arthur, confused and disoriented, asked, "Who turned off the lights? How absurd! Who did this?" Amelia, in shock but with a steady voice, pointed to Lucas. It was him. He knew. He saw the crack. He predicted that that there would be a fire. He saved everyone. Then came the shock and astonished disbelief of those present. The engineers and firefighters who arrived shortly after, called in a hurry, confirmed what Lucas had predicted with frightening accuracy. The structural failure was old and serious, and the power outage had, in fact, prevented a catastrophic fire that would have consumed the entire mansion and put hundreds of lives at risk. Mr. Arthur looked at Lucas, the basement assistant he wanted to dismiss who had saved his $1 million estate. Mrs. Alara, who despised him, couldn't hold the boy's gaze. The greatest victory, however, was the transformation in perception and in hearts. Lucas, the invisible boy, became the silent hero of that day. Mr. Arthur, a man who valued only money and image, approached Lucas with a humility he had never shown to anyone in his life. He knelt in front of his grandson amid the rubble, and in his eyes, once cold and calculating, there was a sparkle of genuine gratitude and deep remorse. He didn't say thank you out loud, but asked, his voice breaking, How did you know all this, my grandson?" Lucas, instead of responding with words, reached out and gave him the galactic night doll, as if to say, "He helps me see, understand, and navigate through chaos." Lucas's small victories were not just about saving the mansion. They were about saving himself from invisibility, showing everyone that true intelligence does not need a voice to be the most powerful, and that love and acceptance are the most solid foundation for any life and any legacy. The incident at the mansion, brought about by Lucas's quiet and unexpected genius, was an emotional earthquake that shook the foundations not only of the building, but of the lives and values of everyone who had despised and ignored him. For Mr. Arthur, the patriarch of the family, the imminent loss of his fortune and the unexpected salvation by his autistic grandson were a cathartic and transformative shock. He was forced to confront the superficiality of his values, his own blindness, and the cruelty of his denial towards Lucas. The deckhand he wanted to discard and considered a nuisance was the only one who saw the truth, who saw the patterns, who sensed the danger that no engineer or expert had detected in decades. The guilt and remorse for how he treated Lucas consumed him, opening a crack, a breach in his once hardened and impenetrable heart. For Mrs. Alara, the strict and impersonal housekeeper, the shame was public and overwhelming. Her authority and contempt for Lucas were exposed as pure ignorance and lack of humanity. She, who prided herself on her efficiency and ability to control, had been blind to the imminent danger, while the boy she considered useless and strange saw everything with crystal clarity. For Lucas, the turnaround was a rebirth of the soul. He did not seek recognition or revenge. His action came from an intrinsic need to organize chaos to solve the problem, to prevent destruction. For the first time in his life, his internal world of patterns and perceptions was validated and understood as a strength, not a weakness. He felt the deep relief of being seen, of being valued, not for speaking or fitting into social patterns, but for being himself, in his essence. His autism, once a burden to others, revealed itself to be the source of his genius and his extraordinary ability to save lives and property. For Amelia, the cook, the experience strengthened her conviction and faith in love. She had believed in Lucas because of her intuition and affection, and her faith was rewarded in a big way. Amelia's revenge was not to expose the mistakes of others, but to prove that love and acceptance are the most powerful tools for seeing hidden potential, for seeing beauty in what the world discards, and that dignity resides where least expected, in pure and silent hearts. The truth that no one wanted to tell was that the mansion was not only physically crumbling, but morally as well, and that salvation came from the purest, most underestimated, and most misunderstood soul of all. Life in the mansion after the incident would never be the same, and the transformation, though gradual, was profoundly positive and systemic. Lucas, the autistic boy who had been handed over as a basement helper, was no longer invisible. Mr. Arthur, transformed by gratitude and remorse, not only invested in the complete restoration of the mansion, ensuring its safety, but also created a robust foundation in Lucas's name, dedicated to autism research, the creation of inclusive spaces, and support for neurodiverse families. He began to devote himself to understanding his grandson, learning to communicate with him, and valuing his unique perspective on the world. A true grandfather. Amelia, the cook, who was once a secondary figure in the mansion, became Lucas's guardian, his mother figure, his safe haven. Mr. Arthur, in a gesture of deep gratitude and recognition, named her administrator of the mansion, entrusting her not only with the care of the building, but also with Lucas's well-being and development. She continued to love Lucas with the same purity, guiding him in his development and protecting him from the world's misunderstanding. Lucas flourished in his new environment, surrounded by respect, understanding, and unconditional love. His stims and repetitions were no longer seen as problems, but as part of his identity, his way of expressing joy and comfort. He continued to explore patterns, to talk to the world in his own way, and his genius for logic and identifying anomalies was channeled into architectural and security projects where his unique and detailed vision was invaluable. Lucas's story is not just about a boy who saved a mansion. It is about the quiet strength of genius, the devastating blindness of prejudice, and the transformative power of unconditional acceptance. It is about how a child dismissed as weird became the key to a family's salvation, and proof that true ability resides in all forms of mind, and that the greatest wealth lies in the human connections that form when love prevails over judgment. Not every voice needs words to be heard. Sometimes the purest genius lies in the silence of a gaze that sees invisible patterns, in the power of a gesture that saves lives, in the courage of those who decide that their very essence is the highest expression of value. Because true acceptance is not limited to what is conventional, it celebrates the diversity of ways of existing and communicating. If the story of Lucas, the autistic boy who saved the mansion, touched your heart, if you felt the pain of abandonment and the overwhelming power of misunderstood intelligence, then this message is for you. Don't let this powerful story end here, in your mind. Leave your comment and share your thoughts. What did this story awaken in you? What lesson do you take away for your life? Share this story with someone who needs to hear this truth, this message of hope and courage, today. And if you want to continue to be inspired by stories that transform and remind us of the power of acceptance and neurodiversity, then please subscribe to our channel now and turn on the bell. Join our community to amplify these voices and build a world where all voices, spoken or silent, are heard, valued, and celebrated. Your voice, your engagement, your empathy can make a difference. Let's give voice to the silence together.